The hiss was the first thing, the sound that always preceded the storm. It was a constant, serpentine whisper of encrypted communications saturating the hermetically sealed room. A sound Eitan had come to associate with the drawing of a finely honed blade from a well-oiled leather sheath. It wasn't a single tone, but a complex chord of digital ghosts arguing in the ether. The low, guttural static of frequency-hopping military radios, the high-pitched shriek of compressed data packets, the almost subliminal hum of their own defensive electronic countermeasures. This multi-layered hiss was the white noise between the known world and the one they were about to violently, irrevocably reshape. Here in the frigid, recycled air of the command center buried deep beneath the black volcanic rock of the Golan Heights, that sound was the only bridge to the chaotic thrum of Damascus, 100 kilometers and a lifetime away, yet as intimate as the film of cold sweat on his brow. The room, known on official schematics as Site 93B, but called the Orchard by the few dozen souls who knew of its existence, was a place where futures were pruned, where bitter fruit was culled before it could ripen. On the main screen before him, a triptych of high-definition feeds painted a dispassionate, godlike portrait of a single moment in time. The left panel, a thermal image from a KH-13 series surveillance satellite hanging in the velvet black of low orbit, depicted a ghostly white figure pacing behind a third-floor window. The heat of his body was a vibrant, living beacon against the cool blues and purples of the Syrian night. A human soul rendered as a smear of angry light. The center panel was a direct feed from their asset on the ground, codenamed Cicada, a grainy, wobbling view from a smartphone camera concealed in a dusty, derelict apartment across the street. The perspective captured the mundane, pockmarked facade of the target building with nauseating immediacy. The lens occasionally obscured by a drifting mote of dust. The right panel was the Predator's eye view, a crystal-clear, gimbal-stabilized image transmitted over a tight beam frequency of 24.5 gigahertz from the Sting, a bespoke quadcopter drone hovering silently at 400 meters. Its matte black, radar-absorbent carbon fiber chassis and acoustically baffled rotors rendered it all but invisible to the naked eye and the listening ear. It was a phantom, a patient raptor waiting for a command to fall from the sky. Status on target. Eitan's voice was flat, a calibrated instrument of calm designed to betray nothing of the coiled knot of tension in his gut. He sat forward in his ergonomic chair, the faint, sterile scent of ozone from the air purifiers and the metallic chill of the air conditioning filling his nostrils. The Orchard was a concrete sarcophagus, shielded by 30 meters of reinforced earth and steel mesh from orbital eyes, bunker-busting munitions, and the most sophisticated electronic eavesdropping. The only organic smells were the faint aroma of stale coffee and the lingering ghost of the cheap, pungent cigarettes the night shift chief favored. It was a modern temple, where the State of Israel performed its darkest, most necessary magic. Target is confirmed, solo in the study, a voice replied in his custom-molded earpiece. The sound so clear, it felt like it was originating from inside his own skull. The clipped, precise tones belonged to Nadav, a prodigy from the Signals Intelligence Unit 8200. Nadav was a wraith in his own right, a pale young man who lived more in the digital spectrum than the physical world, his face illuminated only by the glow of a dozen monitors in a similar bunker miles away. Eitan pictured him now, hunched over, fingers flying across a keyboard, a can of sugar-free energy drink sweating condensation onto a stack of classified printouts. Voice print is a 99.7% match for General Mohsen al-Jamil. He's on a call. Unencrypted standard cellular. Complaining to his wife about the quality of the local bread. Says it's stale. A ghost of a smile, thin and sharp as a shard of glass, touched Aitan's lips. General Al-Jamil, the engineer, the quiet, unassuming architect of the precision guidance program that was methodically turning Hezbollah's vast arsenal of crude rockets into surgical instruments of terror. A man who had more Jewish blood on his hands than any other operative in the Quds force. A man whose work promised a future of unimaginable horror for the northern communities of Israel. Yet here he was, moments from oblivion, lamenting the texture of a pita. The banality of evil, Eitan thought, was a constant, almost comforting surprise. It made the monsters seem small, manageable, just before you erased them. Wind speed is stable at 2 knots, bearing 340. Came another voice, this one belonging to the drone pilot, Rona. She was a young woman with the steady hands of a neurosurgeon and the unnervingly placid demeanor of a deep-sea predator. Her world, in another subterranean cell, was narrowed to a set of flight controls, a throttle, and the endless stream of telemetry data from the Sting. Atmospherics are clear. Sparrow is warm. Ready for deployment on your command, Eitan. The Sparrow was the mission's centerpiece, a triumph of miniaturized lethality and plausible deniability. It wasn't a missile in any conventional sense. It was a 1.2-kilogram guided munition, a tungsten-cased cylinder packed with a meticulously layered composite of HMX octogen and a polymer-bonded explosive known as PBXN-109. It was not designed to level a building or even a room. It was designed to punch through a specific pane of glass, travel precisely 3.7 meters into a designated space, and detonate with the focused force of a ruptured high-pressure gas main. Not a decibel more, not a decibel less. The explosion would be directional, a shaped charge focused downward and outward, engineered to blow out the window frames and scorch the interior walls in a starburst pattern that forensics would scream was a natural gas leak. The shrapnel was frangible, a special alloy designed to disintegrate into a fine, almost invisible dust that would be indistinguishable from pulverized concrete and plaster in the aftermath. It was a weapon designed to erase itself, to leave behind nothing but a tragic, believable accident. The plumber is clear, Eitan confirmed, his eyes flicking to a small, separate monitor displaying a single green dot moving steadily away from the target zone on a digital map of Damascus. Farid, their man on the inside, a Syrian maintenance worker for the state-run gas company, a quiet, broken man whose 7-year-old daughter had been crippled by a Hezbollah rocket that had fallen short during a border skirmish years ago. His motivation was purer and harder than any ideology. For a modest payment wired to a Swiss account and new identities for his family in Germany, he had spent 2 months meticulously documenting the building's gas infrastructure. 3 weeks ago, he had used a custom-made torque wrench, its calibration carefully calculated by engineers in Tel Aviv, to slightly over-tighten a valve fitting on the main riser feeding the 3rd floor. The action created a minuscule, undetectable stress fracture, a seed of destruction waiting for a spark. He had logged the visit as routine maintenance. The stage was set. The lie was already in the paperwork. "Command, this is Watcher." Nadav's voice cut in again, sharper this time, losing its academic calm. "We have a complication. A vehicle is approaching the target building. Black Mercedes S-Class. No plates." Eitan's focus, which had been spread across a dozen data points, snapped to the wobbly center feed from the smartphone. The asset panned the camera down just as powerful headlights washed over the dusty street. The car, a polished obsidian shadow that seemed to drink the dim street lights, slowed and pulled up directly in front of the building's main entrance. Eitan's heart rate, a disciplined and steady 60 beats per minute, ticked up to 65. This was unscheduled, unidentified, an anomaly in the sterile, beautiful equation of the operation. "Identify," Eitan commanded, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the cool metallic edge of his console. "Working. It's not in our database of known IRGC or Mukhabarat vehicles. Civilian pattern, but it's armored. I can see the reinforced pillars and the thickness of the glass." "Wait." A pause stretched into an eternity, thick with unspoken, catastrophic possibilities. On the thermal feed, the white-hot silhouette of Al-Jamil moved toward the window, his form becoming sharper, clearer, likely drawn by the sound of the arriving car. He was the specter of heat against the cool glass, a perfect, incandescent target. "A woman is exiting the vehicle, and a child. Repeat, a female and a small child are exiting the vehicle." The words landed like ice chips in Eitan's gut. The smartphone camera zoomed shakily, the digital pixels struggling to resolve the image. A woman in an elegant but conservative headscarf helped a little girl, no older than 5 or 6, out of the back seat. The girl was clutching a bright pink balloon that strained against her small fist, a tiny, helium-filled orb of impossible innocence in the grim tableau. They were walking toward the main entrance of the building, the doorman rushing to greet them with a deferential bow. "Abort!" a new voice commanded in Eitan's ear, overriding all others. It was Miriam, the director of the Caesarea department of Mossad, patched in from her sterile office in Tel Aviv. Her voice was calm, but it carried the absolute, unyielding weight of law. "The protocol is absolute. Bring the bird home, Eitan." "Director, the window is perfect," Eitan countered, his voice a low, urgent rasp. His eyes were locked on the thermal signature of Al-Jamil, who was now peering down at the street, his form perfectly framed. "He's at the glass. We will never get a cleaner shot. The collateral will be minimal. The detonation is focused inward and downward. It won't even crack the plaster in the adjacent rooms." "The protocol is not a suggestion, Eitan. It is a covenant." Miriam's voice was unyielding, cold as the bottom of the sea. "No children. We are not them. I will not authorize a strike that could create a martyr out of a 5-year-old girl holding a balloon. Stand down. That is a direct order." Eitan watched, his jaw tight enough to crack a tooth, as the woman and child disappeared into the building's ornate entrance. The pink balloon bobbed for a moment in the doorway, a final, defiant splash of color, then vanished inside. On the thermal feed, Al-Jamil stepped back from the window, his white-hot form melting back into the ambient temperature of the room, becoming indistinct once more. The moment was gone. The perfect window, the culmination of 18 months of painstaking work, had slammed shut with the force of a tomb door. "Rona, return to holding pattern, point delta," Eitan said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He leaned back in his chair, the tension leaving his shoulders in a sudden, heavy slump. He closed his eyes, and for a fleeting, sickening moment, he wasn't in the orchard. He was back in Kiryat Shmona 7 years ago. The air was thick with the smell of cordite, burning plastic, and something sickeningly sweet that he would later learn was human blood. The high-pitched wail of sirens was a soundtrack to the jagged, gaping hole ripped in the side of a community center. It had been the engineer's first masterpiece. A short-range Katyusha rocket, upgraded with a rudimentary but lethally effective guidance package salvaged from an Iranian drone. So precise it had flown through a second-story window during a youth group meeting. Eitan's cousin, Sarah, a 22-year-old youth counselor with a laugh that could fill a stadium and a future as bright as the Galilean sun, had been inside. He remembered the phone call from his aunt, her voice a raw, shredded thing that bore no resemblance to the warm tone he'd known his whole life. He remembered walking through the wreckage the next day, the scene a frozen tableau of horror. A half-melted backgammon set, a child's sneaker with the laces still tied, a scorched poster for a summer music festival. The image of the pink balloon, so innocent and yet so potent, superimposed itself over the memory of the twisted metal, the shattered lives, the phone call that had hollowed out his world. Miriam was right. They were not them. But the cost of that moral distinction was a living, breathing monster who would wake up tomorrow, go to his laboratory, and continue his work with renewed vigor. The mission, codenamed Operation Midas Touch, hadn't begun tonight. It had begun 18 months ago, in the digital ether of Unit 8200's vast listening stations in the Negev. A single, heavily encrypted message, bounced from a server in Tehran to a cutout in Beirut, had been snagged by a new quantum computing-powered decryption algorithm still in its beta testing phase. It contained a parts manifest, miniaturized gyroscopes, high-tolerance accelerometers, specialized servo motors, components for turning dumb rockets into smart killers. At the bottom of the manifest was a code name, Sarbaz, the Persian word for soldier. It took another 3 months of painstaking intelligence work, of cross-referencing SIGINT with whispers from human assets deep inside Iran, to put a face to the name. General Mohsen al-Jamil, a brilliant, unassuming aeronautical engineer who had risen through the ranks of the Quds force by being smarter and quieter than anyone else. He was a phantom. His official file was thin, his public footprint non-existent. He didn't attend parades or give speeches. He worked in anonymous labs and communicated through layers of cutouts. He was the brain, the quiet genius behind Hezbollah's looming strategic threat. The first challenge was finding him. He moved between Iran, Iraq, and Syria like a whisper on the wind. A team from the Kidon, Mossad's elite assassination unit, had been spun up and ready to deploy to Beirut 6 months ago, based on a tip from a disgruntled Hezbollah quartermaster. They had a plan involving a shaped charge concealed in a fire extinguisher, to be placed in the hallway of a hotel where al-Jamil was scheduled to meet a Hezbollah commander. But al-Jamil never showed. The meeting was a feint, a test of his own security protocols. He was paranoid, and his paranoia, Aitan had to admit with grudging respect, had kept him alive. The breakthrough came from the most mundane of sources: human weakness. Al-Jamil had a fondness for a specific type of pistachio baklava, made with rosewater and honey from the Damascus plains, prepared by only one small, family-owned bakery in the ancient Medan district. An asset, a scion, a non-Israeli Jew who voluntarily provides assistance to Mossad, who owned a nearby spice shop, was activated. For weeks, he simply observed, his life a quiet routine of weighing out cumin and coriander while his eyes missed nothing. He noted every customer who bought the specific type of pastry al-Jamil favored. The list was long, but one customer stood out: a low-level Syrian army driver who made the same purchase every Tuesday and Friday morning, always paying in crisp American dollars. Surveillance on the driver led them to the apartment building in the affluent Medzeh district. It wasn't a military barracks or a fortified compound. It was a residential block, home to doctors, lawyers, and mid-level Ba'ath Party officials. Security through anonymity. The perfect hideout. It was then that the plan began to shift. A Kidon team on the ground was deemed too risky. The Medzeh district was crawling with plainclothes Mukhabarat agents. Any firefight, any botched exfiltration would be a diplomatic catastrophe. The order came down from the Prime Minister's office itself. The strike had to be deniable. Utterly, completely, and plausibly deniable. It had to look like an accident. An act of God, or more specifically, an act of shoddy Syrian infrastructure. This was where Eitan's team took the lead. He was a Ketsa, a case officer, a conductor of complex human and technical orchestras. His specialty was what the agency called special projects, a sterile euphemism for operations that existed in the grayest of moral and legal zones. His first task was to build the foundation of the lie. He needed a man inside the system. He tasked the human division with finding a vector into the Damascus State Gas and Electric Company. They found Farid. They vetted him for 3 months, studying his life, his finances, his grief. The approach was made through a cutout, a supposed German businessman offering a job opportunity for a skilled technician in Frankfurt. Farid, desperate to get his daughter the specialized medical care she needed in Europe, agreed to a meeting in Istanbul, in a quiet, soundproofed hotel room overlooking the Bosphorus. The truth was revealed. He didn't flinch. His hatred for Hezbollah was a cold, hard stone in his chest. He agreed without hesitation. The technical planning ran in parallel. The engineers at Rafael Advanced Defense Systems were tasked with creating the Sparrow. They tested dozens of explosive compositions, detonating them inside replica rooms built in the Negev desert, analyzing the blast patterns, the sound signatures, the chemical residue. They needed it to be perfect. The drone, the Sting, was an off-the-books project. A Frankenstein's monster of commercially available parts and bespoke military-grade electronics, designed to fly under the radar of even the sophisticated Russian-made Pantsir air defense systems deployed around Damascus. Its components were smuggled into Syria in pieces, a logistical nightmare. The flight computer was hidden in a diplomatic pouch. The carbon fiber fuselage was disguised as architectural samples. The high-torque motors were embedded in a shipment of medical equipment. It was assembled by a 2-man Kedan team in the damp, reeking basement of a safe house in the Barzeh district, a place that smelled of dust, decay, and fear. Every step had been a dance on a razor's edge. Farid nearly had a heart attack when his supervisor made a surprise inspection the day after he tampered with the valve. The Kedan team assembling the drone had to lie motionless for 6 hours when a Syrian police patrol decided to use their street to take a long lunch break. The drone's initial test flight was almost spotted by a teenager flying a toy drone from a nearby rooftop, forcing Rona to execute a high-risk evasive maneuver that nearly drained its battery. Each near miss frayed Eitan's nerves, adding another layer of scar tissue to his soul. Now, all that planning, all that risk, all that sacrifice had been put on hold by a little girl and a pink balloon. "He's settling down for the night," Nadav reported, his voice tinged with the shared disappointment that hung in the recycled air of the orchard. "Lights are going out in the rest of the apartment. He's back in the study, reading. We've lost the voice print." "The woman and child?" Eitan asked, his voice hollow. "Thermal shows them in a bedroom on the same floor, opposite side of the building. Likely his family making a surprise visit. Not in our intelligence profile. He was supposed to be alone." A new piece of the puzzle, an unwelcome one. The engineer had a family. He wasn't just a monster in a lab. He was a husband, a father. Eitan brutally pushed the thought away. It was a luxury he couldn't afford. You don't humanize the target. It was the first rule, the one that kept you sane. For the next 3 hours, they watched. The Sting drone, its battery life calculated to the second by Rona, circled in its high holding pattern, a patient, silent angel of death. В саду ароматного напитка готовили, который имел горьковатый и затхлый вкус. Никто не разговаривал особенно много. Напряжение ощущалось в воздухе, оно было ощутимо и подавляюще. Эйтан пересмотрел возможные ситуации. Что, если Аль-Джамиль покинет здание? Что, если он встретит другого посетителя? Что, если сирийская система противовоздушной обороны обнаружит их дрон? На каждую ситуацию имелся свой протокол, заранее спланированный ответ. Однако не было протокола для ожидания. Ожидание было самой сложной частью. Именно в этот момент возникали сомнения, моральные оценки размывались, и образы призраков, таких как Сара, начинали появляться в мыслях. В 2 часа 17 минут по дамасскому времени голос Надава раздался, заставив Эйтана выйти из печальных размышлений. Движение. У нас есть движение. Женщина и ребенок покидают квартиру. Эйтан сел прямо. Его усталость исчезла в вихре чистого адреналина. Каждому экрану он уделял максимальное внимание. Нечеткое изображение со смартфона показало, как открывается входная дверь здания. The same woman, the same child, this time without the balloon, emerged and got back into the black Mercedes. It pulled away from the curb without haste and drove off, its taillights disappearing into the Syrian night. Can we track the vehicle? Eitan asked, his mind already racing ahead. Negative. No tracker, no plates. It's a ghost. Any idea why they left? Any chatter? Chatter is zero. Could be anything. A family argument, a late-night errand for medicine. We don't know. But it didn't matter. The complication was gone. The board was clear. Director, are you seeing this? Eitan's voice was steady again. The hunter's instinct reawakened and sharp. A pause on the line from Tel Aviv. Eitan could picture Miriam, alone in her office, a cup of tea growing cold on her desk, staring at her own repeater screen. I see it, Eitan. The window is reopening. Her voice was heavy. She was giving him the discretion, but also the full weight of the responsibility. If this went wrong, if a single civilian was harmed, it would be on his head. Target status? He's back at the window, Nadav confirmed, a new energy in his voice. Pacing again. He's on the phone. We have voice confirmation. It is Al-Jamil. Rona, bring the bird in. Eitan commanded, the words coming out like chips of stone. Stealth approach, vector 090. Begin final systems check. Copy command. Sting is inbound. Rona replied, her voice a placid stream in the raging river of tension. On the right-hand screen, the Predator's eye view began to change. The drone descended from its holding pattern, the city lights of Damascus growing larger, resolving from a glittering carpet into individual streets, cars, and buildings. The Sting's flight path was a complex, pre-programmed dance, following the dark canyons of unlit alleyways and parks, using the urban geography to mask its approach from known radar installations. Its onboard systems were a marvel. A terrain-following LiDAR kept it at a precise altitude, while its inertial navigation system was constantly updated by encrypted, jam-proof satellite links. It was flying in near total electronic silence, emitting nothing, a ghost in the machine. 1 kilometer out, Rona reported coolly, switching from thermal to optical. The building is in sight. The feed shimmered for a second, then resolved into a magnified, high-contrast night vision view. The target building filled the screen. It was quiet, sleeping. A single light burned on the 3rd floor, the engineer's study. Nadav, I need absolute confirmation he is alone in that room. Confirmed, Command. We have a faint thermal signature from his satellite phone and his body heat. Nothing else. The rest of the apartment is cold as a tomb. Farid's work, Eitan said. more to himself than to the room. Is the lie holding? The pre-planted narrative is locked and loaded. Nadav replied, "Our social media assets are standing by. We have a dozen sock puppet accounts ready to report a phantom gas smell in the Medsey district over the last week. We have a doctored gas company maintenance report ready to leak to a friendly journalist at Al Jazeera. The moment you give the word, we start building the reality." Reality. Eitan mulled the word. They weren't just killing a man. They were manufacturing a truth. A carefully constructed fiction that would be reported on the news, debated by analysts, and eventually accepted by the world as historical fact. It was the ultimate, most terrifying expression of power. 300 meters, Rona said. The drone was now moving at a crawl, its rotors barely turning, using the faint city breeze to help it glide. Acoustic sensors are green. We are undetectable. On the screen, the third-floor window grew larger, filling the frame. The details became shockingly sharp. A small crack in the plaster on the window frame. A potted geranium on the sill. Inside, through the thin, translucent curtains, the ghostly shape of Al-Jamil paced back and forth. Phone pressed to his ear. "He's agitated," Nadav whispered, as if the target might hear him. "We're running a live translation through the system. He's arguing with someone in Tehran. Something about a shipment delay for the new gyroscopes." Perfect. He was distracted. His focus was 1,000 kilometers away. 100 meters, Rona said. Laser designator is active. A tiny, invisible infrared laser dot, visible only to the drone's sensitive optics, painted the precise center of the middle pane of glass. The Sparrow's guidance system locked onto it, a digital falcon sighting its prey. "Target is locked," Rona confirmed. "All systems are go. The Sparrow is ready to fly." Eitan took a deep, steadying breath. This was the precipice, the point of no return. He thought of Sarah, of her stolen laughter. He thought of the intelligence reports on his desk, detailing the thousands of upgraded rockets already in Hezbollah's arsenal, each one aimed at a city, a school, a home in northern Israel. He thought of the little girl with the pink balloon and thanked whatever God was listening that she was gone. "Send it," Eitan said, his voice a dry rasp. "Sparrow is away," Rona said, her tone unchanged. On the screen, a small, dark shape detached from the underbelly of the drone. It fell for a fraction of a second before its micro-thrusters fired in tiny, silent puffs of compressed nitrogen gas. It didn't streak toward the window like a missile. It floated almost delicately, correcting its course with surgical precision. It was less a weapon and more a key, designed for a single lock. The next 3 seconds stretched into a lifetime. The Sparrow passed through the invisible laser beam, its optical sensor making a final, infinitesimal course correction. It struck the glass, not with a crash, but with a sharp, clean pop, like a champagne cork being opened in another room. The tungsten tip, heated to over 1,000 degrees Celsius by an internal chemical reaction triggered milliseconds before impact, melted a perfectly round hole in the pane, punching through without shattering the surrounding glass. The munition entered the room. Its internal laser altimeter measured the distance from the floor. Its forward-looking sensor calculated the distance from the far wall. It knew exactly where it was in 3-dimensional space. The thermal feed showed Al-Jamil turning, his head cocked, a flicker of surprise on his face as he registered the tiny sound, the small, dark object that had just flown into his study. He had half a second to comprehend his fate. The Sparrow detonated. The screen flashed white, a complete overload of thermal energy. For a split second, the image was a perfect, beautiful, terrible flower of pure heat, blooming and then vanishing, The feed from the drone, now pulling away at maximum speed, showed the window and a large section of the exterior wall blowing outward in a roiling cloud of orange fire and black smoke. The sound that reached the asset's phone a moment later wasn't the sharp crack of a military explosive. It was a deep, resonant whoomph, the sound of expanding gas, exactly as the engineers in the Negev had designed. Impact confirmed. Target eliminated, Rona said, her voice still impossibly, unnervingly calm. Nadav, go, Eitan commanded, his own voice shaking slightly with the release of tension. Narrative is live, Nadav said, the clatter of his keyboard audible over the comms. Bots are active. First social media posts are hitting Twitter and Telegram now. Huge explosion in Meze. Smells like gas. Did anyone else hear that? The leak of the maintenance report is on a 5-minute timer. In the center panel, the shaky smartphone video swung wildly as the asset on the ground reacted to the explosion. People were shouting in the street below. Car alarms began to blare, a chorus of synthetic grief. The camera zoomed in on the smoking hole in the side of the building. It looked, for all the world, like a catastrophic, tragic, and entirely plausible gas explosion. Drone is aggressing, Rona reported. Climbing to altitude, no sign of detection. But Eitan's eyes were glued to the playback, which he was watching in super slow motion on a side screen. He zoomed in on the moment of the explosion, advancing it frame by frozen frame, the outward blast, the cloud of pulverized concrete, the lick of flames. And there, spinning out of the maelstrom, something small, metallic, and dark. A tiny piece of debris thrown clear of the main blast. It was a stabilizer fin from the Sparrow's tail assembly. Frangible yet, but this one piece, a mere 2 centimeters long, had somehow been carbonized and hardened by the freak thermodynamics of the blast, instead of disintegrating. It tumbled through the air and disappeared into the rubble on the street below. Eitan's blood ran cold. Rona, did you see that? See what, Command? Playback, frame 27B. A piece of the casing, a fin. It survived. It's on the street. A heavy silence descended on the comms channel. Then Miriam's voice, sharp as broken glass. Eitan, what is your assessment? It's a mission-critical failure, Director. If the Iranians or the Russians get their hands on that piece, they'll know. The alloy composition, the machining marks, it's our signature. It's better than leaving a business card. The lie collapses. The elation of the successful strike evaporated, replaced by the cold metallic dread of imminent exposure. They had killed the engineer. But they may have just handed his masters a smoking gun that pointed directly at Tel Aviv. We have an asset 3 blocks away, Eitan said, his mind racing, sifting through contingency plans. A cleanup specialist. We can have him on site in 4 minutes, posing as a curious bystander. The area will be swarming with mukhabarat in minutes, Miriam countered, her voice tight. The risk of losing another asset is too high. The risk of them finding that fin is higher, Eitan shot back. It's the whole operation. It's the entire principle of deniability for the next decade. He was looking at the live feed again. The first emergency vehicles were arriving, their sirens screaming, red and blue lights painting the chaos on the street. A crowd was gathering. Finding a 2-centimeter piece of metal in that mess would be impossible for the local police. But the Iranians would bring in their own forensic teams. They would be methodical. They would sift through every grain of dust. Activate the cleaner, Miriam said after a long, tense pause that felt like an hour. Codename. Janitor. Get that piece, Eitan. Whatever it takes. But tell him he's on his own. If he's caught, we don't know him. Aitan relayed the order. A new icon, a blue dot, appeared on his map screen and began moving with purpose toward the target zone. For the next hour, Aitan and his team watched two dramas unfold simultaneously. The first was the public one. Syrian state television began reporting on a tragic gas explosion in the Mossad district, caused by aging infrastructure and faulty maintenance. Their own planted narrative was being fed back to them, a perfect, self-sustaining echo. The second was the secret one. A man in a simple tracksuit, blending into the gawking crowd, his eyes scanning the rubble at the base of the building, looking for a tiny fragment of truth in a mountain of lies. The janitor was good. He moved with a purpose that looked like aimlessness, slowly circling the police cordon. He used a phone to pretend he was taking pictures, his lens actually scanning the debris field, cross-referencing the images with a schematic of the sparrow fin Aitan was feeding him. The minutes crawled by. Syrian intelligence officers arrived, sharp-suited men in unmarked cars who pushed the local police aside and began securing the scene with brutal efficiency. The window for the janitor was closing fast. Then Aitan saw it. The janitor stooped, pretending to tie his shoe, his hand darting out like a viper's tongue and plucking something from the dust near a piece of shattered concrete. He didn't look at it. He simply palmed it and stood up, melting back into the crowd. A moment later, a single coded text message appeared on Aitan's screen. Broom has swept. A collective, audible sigh of relief went through the orchard. Aitan leaned back, the adrenaline finally leaving him, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. On the main screen, firemen were spraying water on the smoldering facade of the building. The engineer was gone. The lie was secure. The operation was a success. But as he watched the scene, a final detail, a nagging inconsistency, caught his eye. The black Mercedes with no plates had returned. It was parked half a block away, outside the police cordon. A woman was standing by the car, looking at the building. Even on the grainy phone camera, Aitan could see she was not crying. Her expression was cold, hard, and analytical. She wasn't a grieving widow. She was an observer, a professional. Nadav, Aitan said, his voice low and dangerous. Run facial recognition on the woman by the Mercedes. Cross-reference with every allied database we have. IRGC, VEVAK, GRU. Top priority. Working on it, Command. The janitor's blue dot was now safely away from the scene. The Sting drone was back over Israeli airspace. The team in the orchard was beginning to pack up, the tension breaking as they exchanged quiet words of congratulations. But Aitan couldn't shake the image of the woman. Why come back? Why watch with such chilling detachment? Got a possible match, Nadav said, his voice suddenly tight with disbelief. It's a tentative hit, low confidence, from an old CIA file from their operations in Iraq 10 years ago. Who is she? Aitan asked, leaning forward again, his heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat against his ribs. The file identifies her as Colonel Azita Farhani, an instructor at the Quds Force Training Academy outside Tehran. Her specialty is damage assessment and post-operation counterintelligence. Nadav paused, and the silence that followed was more terrifying than any alarm. Her file also says she was General Al-Jamil's wife. Aitan stared at the screen. The woman, the mother, the seemingly innocent civilian who had aborted their first attempt, was an operative, a high-ranking one. The visit with the child hadn't been a family outing. It had been a security sweep. She had likely been checking the area, using the child as the perfect, unimpeachable cover before her husband's planned departure. And her sudden exit just before the strike? It couldn't be a coincidence. It was too perfect. Nadav, Aitan said slowly, a cold knot of dread forming in his stomach. Scan all encrypted and unencrypted chatter from the last 3 hours originating from the target zone. Keywords: baklava, pastry, medan, and bread. Anything. The search took less than 10 seconds. A single hit appeared on the screen. An encrypted message sent from a burner phone near the target building to a receiving station in Tehran. Sent just minutes after the woman and child had left the apartment. The message was just 4 words in Farsi. The bread is stale. It was the same complaint Al-Jamil had made to his wife on the unencrypted line. But this wasn't a complaint. It was a code, a duress signal. A terrible, sickening realization dawned on Aitan. A flash of insight so profound it felt like a physical blow. They hadn't been listening to Al-Jamil talking